Good day. I would like to present you with a Fireside chat with Keith McCammon, Chief Security Officer and co-founder of Red Canary. Keith leads Red Canary's product development and is responsible for the company's security strategy, operations, and threat research. He has spent nearly 2 decades identifying and solving complex problems related to information security and risk, including over a decade of service to the United States Department of Defense and intelligence community. We discussed current events, how to get into tech, and what's his day-to-day used to look like prior to the COVID-19 and what it looks like now. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Thank you. Cover some topics, and the topics relate to mainly to Keith's background and work history and some views, and then we touch upon some current events. And then what I'd like to get out of this conversation is a couple of things, twofold. One is maybe even threefold. One is to learn something new, right? Something that you didn't know prior to this call. And Keith is definitely the kind of right person to bring on with the vast experience and incredible role. And then the second thing I would like to do is touch upon some current events. We seems to now we're even more so than before. We're disconnected with what's happening. So I actually created these New York Information Security meetup events to connect people from industry and allow them to get exposed to other areas within the industry that they're not typically exposed to. And then I find now that we're basically all social distancing. We even have less of exposure to other folks within the industry. So these short sessions allow us to get a glimpse of what's happening in the industry and a glimpse of the people behind it. So Keith, why don't we get started? And thank you very much, first of all, for joining. And thanks for, you guys missed it. Whoever came in late, Keith just had his cat, a couple of minutes before. So you guys missed that. Hopefully the cat will make another appearance. But what we're going to do is we're going to spend probably about the better part of half an hour, maybe in an open conversation. And talk about, again, Keith's background, his views in the world and cybersecurity and so on. And then, feel free while we're having this conversation to maybe chime in using the chat. And I'd like to make this as interactive as possible. So if you don't mind, why don't we get started and just give us an idea of your career path, how you got to where you are today, what's your current existing role, and it kind of start from there, just having a kind of open conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, by the way. And great chatting with you again. Looking forward to this in terms of scope and subject to questions. Open to anything here. Definitely looking forward to giving like medical and other type of sensitive advice. So my background.
Make sure you have a disclaimer before you do that.
Yeah, right. Today I'm one of the founders of Red Canary, along with small group of folks that we started the company alongside, and now a pretty expansive group of folks that keep us going and do great work every day. My history prior to that was a mix of a lot of offensive work for the government for a period of time. Prior to that, a lot of telecommunications, and so. Pretty wide ranging. I've kind of run the gamut from everything from starting out like doing modem troubleshooting right out of college during the .com boom to running like global network infrastructure to destroying global network infrastructure to now like defending a bunch of enterprises. So it's been fun and meandering.
So I have the greatest appreciation to entrepreneurs in the space. I know how tough it is, and you had a great roles, working for companies. So what made you, take the leap and basically co-found your own business?
First, I think definitely had the benefit of watching some really, really good friends, and some of them still colleagues, business partners, take the leap. It's something that when we all worked, a small group of us worked together. It was just a thing that we kind of always wanted to do, right? And the concept really simply was going from a long time doing a lot of work that none of us could talk about, but that we had a lot of fun doing, to seeing if we could go take what we learned and figure out how to solve problems for a whole bunch of companies, and ultimately even just at a macro level, like do a good job protecting businesses, the American economy, the global economy, you know, in a way that you can't do in a way that's not possible when you're working even in private industry for one company at a time, right? So, can we take what we've learned and, build something that we can use to protect a whole bunch of people?
So what I've seen most of the entrepreneurs, the way they approach it is that they come across, typically when they're working in a different company or other project, they come across an issue or a problem that they don't see the solution anywhere, and then they go out and they create basically to solve the problem of their own. Was this something that Red Canary, like, is this something that you guys encountered and looking to solve? Maybe you can give us a quick overview of what you guys do and what issues do you guys solve basically today?
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, great question. I don't think I've ever actually thought about or answered it that way. Excuse me. Usually we're kind of all looking for, the story that we would tell today about how we knew how the grand plan that we had for this thing that we're doing. And I think it was very much like you described, right? We, a group of friends, effectively, like we all worked together at a little company, doing at the time, like almost any work that we could, right? To help that little company grow. Was working, alongside, albeit virtually, like we were mostly distributed, the folks who built Carbon Black, right, which is now part of VMware. And so, Mike and Ben and the rest of the Carbon Black founding team were building this product, under the premise that doing IR at scale by doing a bunch of dead disk forensics works up to a point. You can't do that for thousands, hundreds of thousands of machines, right? And so they built this piece of software to try to solve that problem. And myself and another group of folks were effectively working on the IR investigative side, right? Working with customers. And so, in the very first inklings of what we would do, now as Red Canary, we're quite literally just, using this tool, doing incident response. And after you're done responding to this incident, the customer is saying, hey, we just deployed this piece of software that's keeping track of everything that happens on our network. We did that to help make this incident response more effective. But now that we've deployed it and it's keeping track of all this data, wouldn't we want to, would you just watch it for us all the time? And we're like, oh, okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense, right? Let's try to not wait until there's another breach and then come back in and just do IR faster, right? And so that was it. It was very organic, like you said. It was partially using software to solve a problem that we knew we had, and then what today is Red Canary was quite literally the customers we were doing work for coming to us with a problem that we hadn't even thought about ourselves, right? Which is can we use this to proactively go find things quickly, early stage, so that we don't end up dealing with breaches and in another incident response scenario. It was very organic for sure.
So specifically, you solve the issues of after the fact, basically. And I'm going to see if I can mute. I think somebody's making a bunch of noise here. Let me see here.
This is just like being on a conference call. This is perfect.
It is. With a bunch of, I got to see if I can, I'm muting a couple of folks here. And excuse me, I got to do it manually. So here we go. I found the culprit here. Okay, so the main issues that basically the problem you're solving is the ability to, when an incident happens, to, I guess, the forensic work, right? The almost the stuff you need to be recorded after the fact. So how does an agent help in that regards? And what would you say are the top two reasons why customers acquire the software today?
Yeah, I definitely started with that little problem. I would say what we do is definitely more expansive, right? The thing when we kind of morphed from, start at IR and then try to do some proactive monitoring to prevent, things from recurring. Red Canary, we definitely both narrowed the scope of what we do in some ways, right? We're not an MSSP. We're not, managing a bunch of devices. They're doing alert triage. what we do for customers day in, day out is like effectively deliver like the highest quality security operations that we can. But being able to do it in a way that we can, deploy and deliver that in, hours and not days, weeks, months, right? So that's what we do today, right? So the technology that we use is a huge part of it, absolutely. The agents and the sensors that we work with and our partners. But it is like all that stuff serves the master, which is like make sure you like don't let your customers get breached, right? We don't want them having a material security event. And so the overwhelming majority of our work, and I think what customers get the most out of, and why why we both enjoy working together is that it's threat intelligence, threat research, detection engineering, security architecture. It's kind of like all the things you would want if you built your own like really, really, really high functioning security operations program, without having to build your own really high functioning security operations program. So,
and what's interesting specifically about your background, you were a network engineer, you're doing security for a while, and now you serve as the chief information security officer, right?
Yeah. So my role today, I guess, like anyone who starts a company, it's, it's equal parts, the things you intend or set out to do. A lot of it is, the title that you need at the time. So like most of my work is, do work on our internal security program, although we've got an outstanding team that does that. Most of my work is on like product and just, meeting with customers and other folks too, just like kind of peers in industry and figuring out, what problems folks have, and then making sure that we're, building and operating towards that. Right. So that's most of it.
It's really interesting because I find the kind of the CISO role for vendors is a fairly newish title. I think, if you look at like 2 years ago, even security companies did not have a CISO.
Yep.
Why do you think that is? Is that a requirement from like your customers, or is it just better to have a CISO to CISO conversation? Is that
that's a great question. And honestly, caught me again. I've never really thought about the fact that like most security companies, like traditionally, you're right, they traditionally haven't. And maybe part of the reason for that is that I would say that like a lot of news, like a lot of the security companies that are big now are still relatively young, right? When you compare them to most of the security industry and a lot of the folks that have been around for decades and not years, right? And in that sense, I'd say we're like probably not. Security startups are not unlike any other startup, right? If you go start a business to do something, very unlikely that in your first few years you end up with a CISO either, right? And I think that's a pattern that we've certainly seen in customers. For us, it's a little bit different in that our customers pay us to reduce risk, right? And so for us, one of the things that like from day zero has always been critically important is just like engineering security into our platform, into our process, like into the heart and soul of every person that works at Red Canary. But also, kind of to your question, making sure like our job is to protect customers. The most likely way to do them harm is for us to have a security event or a breach, right? And so, like if our security team had T-shirts, it would literally, they would say something like "protecting our customers by protecting Red Canary," and that's kind of the way we've always thought of that. It is like it's critical.
And it's almost embarrassing, right? We've seen actually security vendors that were hacked on their own. So, so I think that's a big deal now, especially when. You definitely don't want to be on the news for the wrong reasons. And you have kind of a funny story about the name of and how you came out with Red Canary, and then maybe you can jump on another funny story about, in particular, when I asked you like how did you get to be in cyber, and how did you start? And you mentioned you wanted to be a lifeguard. So maybe you can like start with the name and then jump into the other story. That'd be great.
Yeah, the name, well, I mean, there's two ways to do this. One is to tell the story of how we came up with the name for Red Canary. It's probably, or why Red Canary. I think the part of the story that always makes me chuckle is like the why not something else, right? Which is, we're trying to figure like, we, had this idea, had some great partnerships, particularly with the Carbon Black team early on. And then, sequence of events occurred. We're like, all right, we have to name this thing. We need business cards. Like, it's time to grow up, right? And so we sat down to come up with a name, and you kind of assumed you'd like sit down with a whiteboard and just say, all right, like, what names do we like? And then let's figure out how to choose. And it was kind of the opposite, where, at this time, cybersecurity industry was booming, right? Like, lots of new market segments, threat intelligence platforms were just becoming a big thing. EDR was just becoming a big thing, lots of new companies. And so we actually kind of started from this position of like words, like, what dirty words will we not use? And so
cyber was one.
No? Yeah, how we came to Red Canary aside, right? It was, like, no cyber, that's against the rules. Threat bad, too many threats. And it was kind of like literally this process of just saying, all right, like, what are the words that will not be allowed? And then once we got done with that, we eventually settled on Red Canary. So that's the roundabout version, but probably the version that's more entertaining. So.
Yeah, process of elimination. And there are a lot of like other kind of, you mentioned that there are companies with similar names, and I mentioned that there are a lot of glass companies and fire companies and so on in the cyberspace, and so people are confusing between companies, among companies, right? Similar names.
Yeah, we get a lot of that. The one that we see most, probably like the Thanks Canary folks, right? So they do fantastic work, by the way. We're great friends, and I think they did the thing that we never thought to do, which was actually went one day and like made the blog post or the web page that is just the list of every company with Canary in the name. A lot of them security related. So kind of glad we didn't know all that at the time, because we might have put Canary on the list of dirty words and would have been having a very different conversation.
So I like to bring the the stories behind the folks within this space, just in particular because it is combined and it's people really behind the industry, and everyone has got a story and it's got a unique story and so on, and I like to maybe touch upon it, like your lifeguard story, and because I thought that was cool. Maybe you can share that as well.
Yeah. It was funny. Like, this came in the context of, what were you like in high school? And I was definitely not a computer guy. That was not my thing. I was into sports. I was in band, right? I played the drums. So I was, like, my younger brother, ironically, who now does like nothing with computers other than like type on them when he has to, was the computer guy growing up. I didn't. So was my dad. I just didn't have a ton of interest in it. And went to college. Was paying part of my way through college. So had my choice of work study jobs. I did the thing that seemed natural as an 18-year-old male, which was sign up to be a lifeguard at the college pool. 1,000 other people had the idea. I didn't make the cut. And so I ended up getting stuck in this dungeon Macintosh lab in some dormitory on campus. Like, no one knew how to work these things. They were there to placate what at the time was like, the 1% of weirdos who wanted to use a Mac and not a Windows computer. And so I sat down there. I spent a lot of time by myself, but at the time, like, this was in the mid to late 90s, right? And so .com was kind of booming. I went to college in Virginia, and at the time, Network Virginia was like this. It was one of the first like big like ATM networks that connected all the public universities, and so had an opportunity to go work on some infrastructure projects like that. So got out of the Mac lab, started doing some work on like Unix systems and some of the mainframes and stuff like that. From there, was fortunate to have an opportunity to do some work on like what at the time was relatively big and new infrastructure from a network perspective. And then, just kind of like really, really took a liking to it. I still came out of college with a degree in English. I'm not sure if I wanted to be like cop, lawyer, teacher. But it was a .com boom at the time, right? So there was a tremendous amount of opportunity, and I just kind of, stuck with technology, particularly in telecom infrastructure, for a while until I went into security. So,
well, timing is circumstance, everything, and I've come across that as well. So there's a question here, and we were about to touch upon that, but why don't we just jump right into some current events? Just for some people to have takeaways. So, the COVID-19 created a whole new area of risk, for not just for company, for enterprise, but for yourself as well. So I'd like to talk about your couple things. One is, what this company like working from home situation is for you right now. How do you deal with that as a company, as a security vendor?
Yep.
And then maybe kind of jump from the micro to the macro, like in terms of like what do you see the market is going and how companies are dealing with it as well, and what would you be like your recommendation from your side? That'd be great as well.
Yeah. I guess starting with the work from home, which is interesting. We started this company working from home, so I'm personally very comfortable with it. Half of Red Canary is remote, right? So we have one office in Denver, but almost all of our security operations, incident handling, engineering, like almost all those functions are almost entirely remote for us. And so, infrastructure wise and like process wise, we're set up really well as a company to work remote. There was nothing we had to go scramble to do to make that happen. That said, working remote now is not what I would consider to be working remote, in the sense that even someone who's done it for years knows it, right? Like working remote is, kids go to school, my wife would go to work and I'd sit at home in peace and quiet, kind of like having my own office. So it is funny when we kind of refer to this as remote work, particularly when companies like, yeah, like we're set up for remote work. Don't worry about it. Everything will be fine. And that's true to a large extent, right? Like we've done a great job. We haven't run into any operational issues, but particularly when it comes to just trying to make sure that like people are okay. Working from home under these circumstances is like worlds different than like typical remote work, right? Everybody's here, particularly if you have a family. You can't do the thing that I used to love to do when I worked from home, which was like, every day of the week, a lunch or a breakfast, to just like getting out of the house, getting a change of scenery. So it's the same in some respects, but I think the reality for most people is like very, very, very different and pretty hard. So.
Mm-hmm. And do you find the business velocity is slowed down, or do you find that there's an increased need now from companies? Do you see is cybersecurity as being essential services in some ways?
Yeah, I don't know if we've seen. It's kind of hard to say. Like this is one of the really challenging things, right? Whether you're talking about like sales, customers going to renew or not, or whether businesses are making different decisions about how important cybersecurity is, or whether they think about it differently. It seems like this has been going on forever,
Mm-hmm.
but it's only been a couple months, right? And it's really tough to spot those trends. And it'll be, I think, probably later this year before we all start to figure out, if there were any real macro trends and which ones stick. But I will say it's, everybody, like everyone, not everyone. I'll generalize and say most people like are under a very different time pressure now. Again, particularly if you've got families, roommates, significant others, like you're at home, like people probably aren't as productive as they were before. And that includes businesses, right? So like you might have a business with a great security team, but they might not have the tools or the process to work effectively remote. And so in that regard, I think we have started to see companies like think about the urgency of partnering a little bit differently, just because even if it's just backstopping, right? Again, like they might have a fantastic security team and a fantastic security program that they really believe in. But that doesn't mean that they're just, they're really set up to be successful and protect a business under these circumstances. And maybe like if you look at just some of the specifics, right? You have companies setting up infrastructure on short order, not planned the way that you would normally plan for things like remote access infrastructure, not going through the extensive testing process you want. If you have a compliance program, you're probably having to exempt some things and for the sake of keeping the business running. And so, security teams are having to deal reactively with a lot of those new challenges, and probably having to double down on making sure some of those high risk pieces of infrastructure are safe. And so again, even if they were, well tooled, great, had good process, had good people, they've now suddenly got this crush of work that they didn't expect. And so even just helping to transfer some of the day to day to a partner. I think is like, that's one of the little things I think we're starting to see now is just folks thinking about, okay, like what can somebody else do so that my team can focus on these things that are new and very unique to us. And that can be powerful if you're able to do it well, right?
Mm-hmm. And then what do you find like in terms of, how enterprise is dealing with it, aside from like, as you mentioned, all of the above, transforming into digital all of a sudden, exposing internal application to the outside, just so people can access them, employee can access. What would be, like your view of what's going on? I know sample size of one, a couple of my accounts were hacked, a Visa card and a DoorDash account. And I'm a small sample size, but I think that there is quite an uptick of fraud in general. What would you recommend to enterprise? And do you guys proactively, maybe review some stuff with customers and provide them some guidelines in terms of how to deal with it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's kind of a pretty short list, and we've had tons of great conversations with customers, and obviously like always trying to help not even customers, but literally at this point pretty much anybody who wants to get on the phone, right? And needs or wants help, or just needs and wants to talk. So we've been doing that. I think the big ones have been. A lot of these are the things that you like the same advice you would have given 6 months ago. I think a few of them are a little more acute now, right? Adoption of cloud services is getting to be a really big thing. The proliferation of effectively endpoints, meaning that, not every company was set up to give somebody a computer at home. And so BYOD is happening now, like out of necessity in a whole bunch of places, meaning that like somebody's computer that yesterday they used for gaming or eBay is now being used to access remote access systems for the company, right? And so
some people don't even have it. I heard some banking employees, like they have desktops, right, at work. So they don't even have laptops. So we can't assume that everyone actually has a machine in their house.
Yep.
I mean, some people just jump mobile.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so understanding that's happening is probably job one, right? Like you just have to think about the endpoints that like all of the, and when I say endpoints, I don't mean computers, just like all of the places on the internet that are touching your infrastructure or accessing your data, right? And so like really taking some time to understand that. And probably more important than anything else, right? Just like anybody that does not have multi-factor authentication, like stop everything, do that now, right?
So that was true though before this whole thing happened, right? Before
it was true before. You're right. I think if there's a difference, it's that you think about the implication of typing your username and password into a computer that your company controls, and now you have a lot of people doing that on a computer that no one has ever controlled and has literally been the Wild West, right? When you talk about like BYOD and stuff, and so. In that regard, totally would have given people the same advice 6 months or 6 years ago. But solutions to solve that problem are like getting easier to deploy and set up every single day. And now just kind of with proliferation of access across all these devices, you can't rely on people like being in your office, coming through your infrastructure or even through your VPN. Doing everything you can to protect employee identity and to understand when people are accessing your systems, like making sure you know who those people are and have confidence that they are who they say they are, is maybe like the single, like it was always probably the most important thing. But like now it's gone from this should be on the top of your list of things to plan this year to like this is on the top of your, like this is the top of the list of things to get done like this month, right? You got to make it happen. So.
And so obviously that pandemic accelerated a lot of these trends, right? So working from home and providing employee secure connections and good practices and so on. So it looks like the companies are now scrambled. I don't know if you saw that meme where it's like, what transform digital transformation, A, like the CISO, B, the CIO, and C is the COVID-19, right? So that's what basically propelled everything forward. Do you, after this whole thing is over, do you think some of these trends will continue? Do you think that they will made an impact overall and how security is being viewed by these companies, and also providing contingency plan? I mean, I know September 11 made a lot of a lot of companies change how they thought about recovery and so on. And so, do you think that COVID-19 will create a similar type of change as well?
I do think so. It's actually interesting what you just mentioned is like disaster recovery. It's I hope that it results in some like improvements to just things, foundational security practices, right? Like doing a good job, thinking about training, preventing phishing, doing a good job protecting employee identity, understanding the systems that are accessing your data. That said, I think by far the bigger thing that will come out of this is what you mentioned at the end, which is like IT and disaster recovery and like those kind of like those core business functions or those business processes probably being the ones that actually undergo the most change, right? A lot of the security principles, like some of them right now feel very acute and very urgent, but I don't know that they're new. And I also don't know that once everyone goes back to work that they're going to be top of mind for anybody anymore. But I can tell you right now, like disaster recovery planning, the board asking the leadership of the company, if you had to go remote tomorrow, could you? And if the answer is no, like who's working on that? I think those are the things, again, DR, IT, infrastructure, like those are, I think, are going to be the really, really big ones, right? Because those are the things that like ultimately, security can prevent bad things from happening to the business, but that's not what most people are in business to do. And so, disaster recovery, good IT practices, like cloud adoption, things like that will help the business just be, help business continuity, help like employee mobility, and just keep the business agile. Hopefully those are the things that people really take away from this. And again, like all the way at the board level down, you start to see some just fundamental change in thinking.
And what's interesting as well is that, again, I think that, there was never a situation where companies, they plan for a downturn, right? So they plan for 20%, decrease in revenue, but no one is planned for 95% decrease in revenue. And I think that's number one thing is they care about now is how do we get out of it? How do we survive the next several months? And then security has always been kind of the backstory, but it's still something that they have to take care of despite all the other hurdles. So there's a very specific question here that I don't know if it's going to be of interest to everyone. So maybe we can touch upon quickly about this. But talk about the EDR platforms. They do data collection, detection, and basically recording engine. And it says, how do you offer privacy protection, if any, in such cases, after you collected the data? So maybe you can touch upon briefly because it's a very specific question to the technology.
Yeah. It is specific, although I think it's, it's obviously like it's getting to be more important, right? With like legislation in California and elsewhere. I mean, a lot of it is probably the same. We are a cloud-based service. So, we're architected similar to most other cloud-based services that you use, even though we might be doing different things, right? So in the same sense that, when you type all of your emails into Google or Office 365, you need to have a lot of assurance and a lot of trust. And you also need to ask a lot of good questions to understand like how they handle your data, who has access to data and under what circumstances. So maybe the simple answer is that, we've done, I think, and like continue to put a lot of focus on like data security, data privacy. We have from day one, always trying to do better every day. But I think the simplest answer is like we are architected very similar to a lot of other SaaS companies in that regard, and that you're just you keep your data segregated based on need. You do a really good job with access. You audit that access regularly. I'm like not the first one to go beat the drum of compliance, SOC, and ISO and things like that. But I know like in our case, like they, having gone through those exercises, like those were instrumental in forcing us to make sure that like the things that we wrote down and thought or said we were doing are actually getting done. And also turning around and being able to like have someone else come in and verify that, just so that it's easier to communicate to others and kind of like transfer that trust. So, not a real detailed answer, but I think it's, again, a lot of the same principles you want in any cloud-based platform, right? Which are just like really good security architecture, a thoughtful approach to where you store data, and making sure that only the people who need it can access it, and only for the right reasons.
And do you find, and maybe like a segue to that, do you find that customers are more open now than they used to for having a company like collect the data because of, obviously for very specific reasons? Because I mean, it kind of ebbs and flows. It seems like they, 5 years ago they would not allow it, and then now they allow it, but with caveats. So I don't know if you can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll tell you a funny Red Canary, like another Genesis story, right? Is that we, security nerds, right? So we built this thing. We're like, we're going to go collect everybody's endpoint data. We're going to find all the bad things in it. We're going to tell them about it. It's going to be great, but we're going to host everything because
I know where this is going.
Data collection infrastructure is hard, right? So like, we're going to make it easy for customers. But we went right into it at the time. EDR was new. Cloud for security services at the time was really, really new. And so we just made the assumption, we're like, hey man, like nobody's going to buy this thing if it runs in AWS. So like, we're going to need to go out, we're going to need to go get a colo facility, and we're going to go run on top of OpenStack. And we're going to build this big arc. We're going to build ourselves a little data center inside of a data center, and we're going to grow this company. And then business started going well. And the first time we called our provider and said, hey, we need 3 more of these things, and we need them this week. They're like, oh, awesome. Really glad you need 3 more. We'll cut you a great deal, but we're not going to be able to get them to you for a month. And we're like, crap. And so at that time, we kind of made what we saw as a huge risk. Again, like being, security and privacy focused kind of at our core, and maybe even like just describing it as paranoia. And we're like, all right, well, we got to figure out how to go run this thing on top of a cloud service like AWS. And we definitely we wrung our hands for a long time saying, man, are people going to buy a security service that's like where their data is going into the cloud? Like, we're not sure about this. And we did, we had to work really hard for a long time to, do what you were asking before, which is just how do you communicate to people how and why they should trust you with their data, particularly given that now you're both putting data on someone else's computers. So you have a third party in the mix, kind of at the beginning. We honestly, we didn't do it at first. It resulted in a bunch of business friction. We ended up doing it. Obviously, couldn't be happier, and it couldn't be going better now. But that is it definitely, when we started the company, we weren't I don't think anybody was sure this whole security in the cloud thing was going to take off, right? And now you look at it and you've got what used to be the biggest fixed infrastructure vendors in the world, right? Cisco, PAN, places like that. Now even their infrastructure is in the cloud, and it's come full circle now. I think it might be too far gone for that pendulum to swing back in the other direction, but yeah, definitely was not a foregone conclusion that this would work, man. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And what I've heard now is that some enterprises are moving some critical applications back from the cloud to on-prem or private clouds or whatever the case is. So it seems like it's cyclical. So before we kind of wrap up, I just kind of general question, and it kind of, we can touch upon a lot of this stuff, you've seen enterprise security. Obviously, we've been in this industry for a while, since the days of the first Apple computers. What's changed in the past few years, and where is this industry is going? Just in general, from a vendor perspective, and also from talking to customers.
Yeah. I guess we'll maybe start with just the endpoint space in general, right? That's a good example of just kind of
know a lot about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, haven't seen this pendulum swing, right? For a long time, everyone had one piece of software on their endpoint to do security things. Then most of the last decade has been companies moving in the direction of the right tool for the right job, right? And then you kind of reached what I affectionately refer to as peak endpoint, right? Meaning now we've got customers who are all right, we've got 12 things on there.
Do you have it trademarked?
No, not yet. I just did.
You should have peak endpoint TM, and then have maybe a T-shirt made up.
Yeah, we definitely hit it, right? And we literally was on the phone with a customer a couple weeks ago. They're like, all right, we've got 12 agents on the endpoint. Something's got to give. And so, now you're seeing things converge a little bit, right? And I think the same thing has been true for a lot of like, almost like you pick any part of the security stack, or even like people's approach to security programs in general. And I think, the good news is like there's more information available than ever before. Customers are demanding more transparency than ever before. What do you detect? What don't you detect? How are, like, show me your numbers. How are you doing? Like, what are you doing so that I don't have to, and vice versa. And so I think you're starting to see that same pendulum swing in other places, right? There was the right tool for the right job kind of in each of these areas, whether it's SIM, whether it's network, whether it's endpoint, kind of like expands and contracts, right? And right now, I think, we're in a really neat time in that I think leaders now are, again, better informed, right? They've got better data, and are being more demanding of their vendors. And what you're starting to see now is, I think you're starting to see a lot of teams and even a lot of industries, right? Like financial services may being like a really, really good example, right? For years, it was all in-house all the time. Like no data will leave. I will hire for everything that I need done. And everything has its breaking point, right? And even just if you forget about the technology side of all of this, since it's largely disposable anyway, right? Like you're just all there, like you're there to solve a problem. And I think it's neat to see even those industries where it's, when you build versus buy is not really like, it's kind of a false choice, right? But, in industries where you look at everyone as like they build every part of their program by themselves. And sometimes they build their own tools. You're seeing a lot of those industries all the way from technology, right? Big Silicon Valley companies, all the way to high-end finance organizations, both of which have been builders, either of tools or of programs or both for decades, right? And they're starting to take this different approach, which is like, I can't build a team of infinitely large size anymore. I can't pay for that forever. So what are the things unique to my business that I need a really, really exceptional team to go do, right? Last mile incident response, understanding systems that are unique to that business, understanding software that you build, and taking a pretty radical approach to finding like great partners to go help with all the rest, right? And I think that's probably the most promising trend of all, right? And I think they all, whether it's technology or program building, I think that like that same approach, I think, is really starting to take hold. And it's good. It's the right way to do it, I believe, right? We just, we don't have a talent shortage in information security, as much as everybody likes to say that. Like, I know there are more jobs than there are people. I shouldn't say we don't, but I refuse to believe it's as bad as everyone says it is, right? The problem is that like a lot of companies are probably doing a lot of things that they don't need to do, right? And and again, like I think the trend that we've seen like with a lot of our customers and even some of these industries is that like that's starting to settle in. And I think companies are starting to focus on the things that only they can do. And at the same time, like demanding higher level of quality, higher level of transparency in the partners they bring on to do the rest.
And I completely agree with you with the kind of the shortage and the fact that there's a lot of companies, as you mentioned, it's not a forte to do incident response. It's not their forte to to even have a SOC to begin with, right? Some of them are outsourcing to MSP and so on, but I could not agree with you more. But the kind of the flip side of that is that you have to, because you're outsourcing sometimes critical components, you have to pick your partners wisely, right? Yep. And I think that's where you come in. That's why you have CISO roles within these vendors and so on. So there's something to be said, because you're outsourcing critical components to it. To experts in the field, but you want to make sure that these partners are the right partners. But it's a very positive, I think, turn of events. I think overall.
Yeah, I think it actually, like, I feel like we could do this for hours, and we probably can't do this for hours. But what you just said is interesting too. Is really interesting, like the trend in just looking at security companies, right? And how that has changed in line with what customers want. And to your point of, like security companies having CISOs where they didn't before. And some of that is for network building and just, building a good peer community. But I think the other trend is that like you are a lot of the companies that have provided security software and solutions to businesses for the last like 2 or 3 decades, they are not built by security people. They're built by services people, or they were built by software people. And there is nothing wrong with services or software people, but I think a lot of the security companies that you're seeing doing exceptional work today, that's the difference, right? Is that like a lot of the pedigree of these security companies is, for the first time, like exceptional teams of like security experts who are building software or who are designing services. And that's the difference, right? Like not coming at it saying, I want to go sell software. I can sell a lot of security software. It's, I'm going to go solve that security problem. I might use people to do it. I might use software to do it. I don't care what the balance is, but I want that problem solved, right? And I think that's maybe like a great way to think about how and why that's changed.
Yes, and it's funny you also mentioned it. What I find is security vendors, the great ones have a certain DNA to them, right? So what happened is it's almost like an MSP, a managed service provider, who now wants to add security to it. It's not trivial as hiring, a couple guys or gals and loading a couple of security software and going to the market. There's certain DNA that they require, and what happened is sometimes the enterprise on their side, they don't take these guys seriously. When they want a security vendor, they want a security vendor who's from the ground up, has been built to be a security company, and not somebody that's done, XYZ infrastructure, networking, and so on, and just add security on top of that. So I've seen that as well. Goes both ways, but it's fantastic.
It's a feature they can sell. It's not a thing they set out to fix, right?
Right.
Huge difference.
Right. Huge difference. So I think there's maybe just let's see if there's I just want to see there's some specific, and then we'll kind of wrap up because we're kind of running out of time. It says, trying to train new security engineers. What are some things you want to see in new entry-level security analysts or pen testers that you look for?
Oh boy. The old how do I break in question. Wow. Like there are so many people at Red Canary who are better suited to answer this than me. I will say like my one piece of advice to everyone is, and has always been, just to like, if I had a t-shirt that I made, it would say like better security through better IT, right? Like security is a thing there to make like technology, like we're there to make technology safe for people to use. We're usually not the thing that the business sets out to do like from day one, right? And so to that end, I think like, the one thing that like I think I always looked for is just understanding the technology that you want to protect at a low level. If you want to build solutions or help defend companies from malware, understand how computers work. And that seems like, and a foregone conclusion, but and this is nobody's fault, like compute's easy, right? You can make a computer now by pushing a button in your web browser. But a lot of the stuff we do, like you have to know at a low level, like how this technology works, basics like internet working, how web applications work and are architected and interact. I think a lot of those fundamentals are still really, really important, if for no other reason, like maybe more so now than before, right? Where like, could you get a job without knowing that? Absolutely. You could probably make a tremendous amount of money in security or IT today, not really knowing how computer architecture like works. Like what purpose does memory serve in a device? You don't have to know those things, right? But if someone walks into an interview and they do know it, I understand that they care, that they probably went out and learned a thing that they don't really have to, right? But they also went and took the time to learn a thing that will be the difference between them being good and being really, really exceptional, right? And so that was an example, but I think, always looking for people who kind of like really try to understand the fundamentals. And even on the security operations side, right? It's like not necessarily needing to be a computer science expert, but understanding like what makes any shift-based operation efficient. How do you effectively do things like start an investigation and leave and make sure that the person who came in behind you knows what you did, knows where to pick up where you left off, can communicate with the customer. No matter what the discipline, right? It's just like, there's some fundamentals that like will always serve you well. And I think that's maybe like the the single best piece of advice I have. So.
No, it's good. And curiosity as well. That's what people that are curious and I interviewed a CISO that said that you always ask about the OSI model, and if people don't understand that, he basically said that we're done, because a person should know some of these basic stuff. So maybe just as parting words, any positive, I always this day and age, we like anything positive that you see in industry or personally that you want to share with the group, that'd be great, and then we can part ways.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, thanks again for having me first before we wrap up. This has been absolutely awesome. Sorry we went over time. Also glad that we went over time, and appreciate all the questions. I keep seeing way more pop up than I know we have time to answer, but I don't know. I mean, I think if there's especially now, just with everything going on, right? My life is personally a little bit more chaotic, or way more chaotic than usual. I know the same is true a lot of people. One of the things that we were talking about with a group at work the other day is just that, I think this came up in the context of InfoSec Twitter, which can be a little bit ragey sometimes and can tend to pile on and make big things out of nothing, or sometimes make nothing out of what should be a big thing. But I don't know, just really, really trying to stay positive, particularly in the InfoSec industry, right? I think, one of the things that's been so freaking cool to see is things like this, right? I don't have to get on a plane to be part of the New York InfoSec meetup, right? And I think all the stuff that we're seeing, just everyone taking a little more time to share tools, just have a lunchtime conversation with no agenda with other people that you've never met before. A lot of the open source tools that we're seeing come out, there's a lot of positivity and a lot of great things happening. Sometimes the security industry can tend to get into its head that, they're fixing the same problems all the time and no one loves us. And, we're seen as the Department of No. And I think that all of those trends are changing, right? I think we understand that we're there to enable business, and that is really starting to take hold with folks. And I think just, the way that this industry, which is the one that I happen to see, has responded to what's going on now has been awesome, just absolutely awesome. And not just tools and webinars and things like that and the conferences, but just sitting there logging into Twitter and seeing half of my feed be filled with, hey, I'm going to go spend an hour teaching this class once a week, and in exchange, I would love if you go donate to a food pantry, right? That stuff happening day in, day out. And there's a lot of goodwill and a lot of positivity, and hopefully people will carry that through.
Yeah, that's absolutely awesome. And, we've seen some of that collaboration in global scale, in the healthcare industry. I would love to see some of that happening in this, in the cyberspace as well, all those vendors and companies coming together. And because we're under attack on the virus pandemic front, but I feel because the current event, there's also something's happening, behind the scenes in terms of uptick in crime or cybercrime and so on. So last thing, and again, I much appreciate it for taking time to talk to the group. It's been an absolute pleasure. So you mentioned you had, these habits. You went out for breakfast, you went out for lunch. And so did you have any new habits that you formed since this whole, shelter in place happening that you like to share?
Yeah, I'm
aside from petting your cat more often.
I'm spending a lot more time with the cats. I don't know, man. I think, personally and schedule wise, I've always been an early riser, but most of that was, get up and get some stuff done before the kids get out. I think I found, was on, with Brian from our team, our CEO this morning, and we do a lot of product work together, and both found that waking up really, really early in the morning is a great time to do creative work. And it's I've actually that's one of the habits I've because it used to wake up, try to get through a little bit of email, and then, get the kids fed, get them off to school. And that was kind of the routine. Having a little bit of extra time in the morning, just, trying to figure out when do I do good creative work? What's the best time of day for me to sit down and grind out emails, make sure I'm doing my to-do list. One of the neatest habits is I spent, from 3 o'clock on, I'm pretty much spent, right? my whole family spent ever. It's been a long day already by 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And I think one of the neatest habits has just been, trying to shut down meetings a little bit earlier than usual. But use that time just like literally picking up the phone and calling people. Like spent 2 hours yesterday back to back talking to 2 old friends and colleagues that I haven't talked to in a long time, and just like had really fun conversations. So it's, not the ideal circumstance for this type of change, but I think again, just a lot of good things are happening as a result. And I know like my personal just schedule and being really introspective in terms of like how I spend my time and like what's worth my time. I think that kind of like macro habit has been really helpful to me. So.
Okay, perfect. Keith, thank you very much, and much appreciated. Thanks for everyone who joined, and looking forward to having you next week. And again, much appreciated. We're doing these virtual events now every week, and it's a real pleasure to have people like Keith, join us and share some of their wisdom with us. So take care, and looking forward to be in touch soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for coming.
Bye-bye.